Well, hi everyone. My name is Neil Seldman. I work for Zero Waste USA, and this is one of our ongoing podcast, not podcasts, excuse me, webinars uh, for the COOLNow program of Zero Waste USA, Organics Out of the Waste Stream. The program is directed by Rick Anthony, uh, and our technical director is Chris Sparnicht, who has been quite helpful in making these webinars smooth and coherent. This webinar is a follow-up from previous webinars on, on the COOLNow program, in which people asked for additional information on marketing compost end products. And we are quite lucky to have two top experts in the field to address marketing of finished compost products. Please send us your questions and comments in the chat, and Chris and Rick will help me monitor those. I'm going to introduce our two guests, Sally Brown and Gary Gittere, right now, and then proceed with the presentations. And of course, after the presentations, we will have questions and discussions. Sally Brown is a research professor at the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences at the University of Washington. She has focused her academic career on the use of urban residuals, municipal biosolids, digestates, as well as the organic fraction of the solid waste stream. She was part of the team that developed the BEM model, a tool to calculate climate impacts of biosolids processing and end use for the Canadian government. Her work has also informed New York City, King County, Washington, the USDA, among many other state and local agencies and federal agencies. Dr. Brown is a fellow in the Soil Science Society of America. She is a former two-term member of the National Academy of Sciences Standing Committee on Soil Sciences and was a member of the NAS Committee on Bioavailability of Contaminants in Soils and Sediments. Many of us, many of us know her through her regular column for Biocycle magazine. She has also assembled a library of current research related to municipal biosolids and other organics that is distributed internationally. Dr. Brown has an extensive list of peer-reviewed publications and has co-edited two books on urban agriculture. And finally, she is a member of the USDA Committee on Urban and Innovative Agriculture. She is joined with Gary Gittere, who is a top performing compost sales professional with an award-winning track record of exceeding sales quotas, managing and training teams, and driving organic growth and profitability across small, mid-sized, and large companies. He is an effective leader, communicator, and negotiator who has proven talents for increasing sales from existing accounts and promoting new business. Gary possesses expertise in sales and managing distributor networks, executive trade shows, and overseeing direct sales and marketing initiatives. He excels in product training and placement and related functions. He is known for his skills in driving sales through diverse channels, building high-performance teams, and maximizing profitability through strategic sales management. Since 2011, Gary has been with McGill Environmental Systems, a company that provides a full range of services related to the manufacturing, distribution, and sales of high-quality compost. In this role, he spearheads marketing efforts to promote McGill's premium compost products to municipalities, industrial companies, and agricultural businesses that rely on the company's state-of-the-art technologies. And finally, he oversees marketing initiatives targeting homeowners, landscapers, and those managing turf and earth, helping these entities develop strong and healthy foundations for growing their infrastructure projects. We are indeed very lucky to have them here. With our gratitude, we're going to start now with asking Sally to make our first presentation.
And I will in just a second.
Okay.
So, I hate when people read my biography.
I have the same problem, believe me.
And all I'm going to do is show you a lot of pretty pictures. And maybe you'll even have some questions. Compost is a gigantic umbrella. And one of the critical things with marketing or developing different uses for compost is understanding that within that huge umbrella, there is a potential for a great number of end uses, and that to target products for those end uses, you might have to do a little bit different blending, a little bit different outreach, a little bit different screening, a little bit different adding of different ingredients. Kellogg's Apply has been in the compost business for 100 years, and they're a great place to look at for the range of products. And here what I'm going to do is just go through some of the work that I've done and products that I've worked on. So first I have to figure out how to advance my slide. Okay, EPA with the warm model has just recently taken a giant and wonderful step, and this is a step using relatively old data. And if they had used newer data where you have real-time emissions measurements from landfills, and you quite likely would have gotten even more of a damning conclusion. But what the warm model has concluded is putting food waste in a landfill causes about 58% of the methane emissions from landfills. This is something that's very bad and very easy, at least on paper, to fix. And so with that, you're likely that more cities and states are going to start requiring food scrap diversion. And that's going to mean more compost. Even if it goes to a digester first, there's a really good possibility that that digestate gets composted before you use it. Here's a link to a column I wrote on this for Biocycle, but classic market for compost is agriculture. And there is likely going to be an expanded demand for compost in agriculture. You're not, in my vast, wild imagination, going to see extensive use on compost on things like field corn, wheat crops. It's going to be something that's going to be valuable for high value crops like cauliflower. This is a cauliflower field in California, vineyards, fruit trees, lettuces, garden vegetables. It's a great fit depending on your feedstocks for organic systems. But also realize that for a lot of farmers, before they start to see the wonder and joy and benefits of compost, applying annually at 3 dry tons an acre, it's going to take a while for the benefits to be apparent. But to get moving and expanding into agricultural markets, you're starting to see some governmental agencies pushing this, because there's been an increasing understanding of the importance of soil health and of compost as a gateway drug to get healthy soils. This is from Washington State, where I live. There's a soil health initiative roadmap, and you can see one of the things that the Department of Ag in Washington State is trying to do is overcome existing barriers to using compost, manure, biosolids, and biochar. So you're going to see programs, and you are seeing programs that are going to try and get farmers to use more compost. USDA NRCS has a relatively new conservation practice standard, code 336, where farmers are actually paid to use compost. Biochar as well, but I like compost much better than biochar. It's a relatively straightforward practice. Not all states have gone running with this, but it's on the books, and you can ask about it, and you can work with your NRCS agent to see that this gets implemented. It's a simple soil test required, and this is a great way to extend compost use. In California, I don't know if this is quite on the books yet, but an example of the USDA model for soil carbon sequestration, COMET, you have an extended process to estimate how much greenhouse gas reduction you would get. You pick your agricultural system, your compost loading rate, and they give an estimated compensation price. So here for 8 tons an acre, there's a payout to the farmer for each acre of $1,200. Wouldn't that be lovely? That's moving a lot of compost. Okay. If this isn't where you're headed or where you want to put all your eggs, there are many other specialty markets. And here is the different products, specialty ingredients, recipe testing, and a way to get a higher price for your product. Restoration with an emphasis on native species. It's not just the heavy metal contaminated sites that I've worked on, but there's a concern with restoring native ecosystems. And in many cases, these will require higher carbon mixtures. Lower nutrients will potentially encourage natives over invasives. And so you can develop native plant mixtures for use in restoration. This can be local systems, larger scale projects. This is all from Leadville, Colorado, where we worked a lot with natives to see if we could get natives back on these metal contaminated mine tailings. Home garden markets. This is a huge market, and home gardeners really like a special label on what you're doing, and they want it to work. So this is Ryan Bajaika, who is a grad student who now works in the biosolids program in San Francisco. And for his thesis, he tested different blends of Class A biosolids to see what grew, not the best soybeans or corn, but the best petunias. And we published this article, and you'll see pictures here. The biochar blend does not look nearly as pretty as the yard waste and biosolids blend. And here we used as our gold standard biosolids-based potting soil out of Tacoma. More examples: walnut char blend, not so good at all, and it smelled and it had mold, but this yard waste was great. This here is food yard compost out of the city of Seattle, and it looks pretty crappy. So one thing to realize is calling it compost without optimizing blends or testing isn't necessarily going to cut it in a more competitive market like the home gardener. Great way to enter this market is community gardens. These are community gardens out of Tacoma, Washington, where the program has integrated compost giveaway and biosolids soil blend giveaway to community gardens. We did a survey looking at how well these gardens are used. A lot of people like their community gardens, and it's a great way to get people familiar with your product. In this case, the Tagro potting soil was given to all and is given to all community gardens free of charge. And as a result, or not necessarily as a result, but a stunning coincidence, the sales have increased every year as the donations have increased. And this is the only biosolids program in the country on a per capita basis. They sell out regularly, and their sales have increased to, they broke $1 million for the first time. This is Kristen McIver, who's another former student who is the head of the community garden program, Harvest Pierce County. Another big upcoming, very highly specialized markets are rain gardens and bioretention systems. These are for green stormwater infrastructure. This is a picture from Nora Cates, another student who worked with me developing special compost blends that would preferentially suck out copper, zinc, phosphorus, nitrogen, and PAHs from stormwater to make clean water coming out of the bottom of these systems. And we ended up mixing water treatment residuals with compost at different rates to get a blend that was very well suited to suck out phosphorus, which is a big issue in a lot of cities where fresh water contamination with excess phosphorus is a concern. We used a soil chemistry measure, phosphorus saturation ratio, and you can see there was no phosphorus movement if you get the PSR down low enough. Highways, your state DOT, if they aren't using compost, start talking to them, start working with them. The #1 user of compost in Washington State is our DOT. This is a study that was done by Washington State University, and putting compost and tilling it in on the right-of-way construction. They decreased the bulk density of the soil from about equivalent to a rock to well under half that, which meant that stormwater was no longer flooding the highway, but soaking in on the right-of-way. And this is what state highways wants. Some examples from Washington DOT: if the water doesn't go in, it erodes, and it erodes the soil with it. You can see the erosion channels here, and you can see the part that was treated with compost with nothing moving and plants starting to grow. Another example, conventional highway remedies, seed, mulch, fertilizer, and tack fire does crap. Compost and seed only. This is outside of Spokane, Washington. It looks great. And this is also a market which can be forgiving for larger particle sizes and some level of contamination, meaning glass and plastic. Finally, cannabis is getting legal more and more places, and growers get a premium price for their product, and they want something that can grow really well if they're not growing in hydroponics. Two products that were used in Northern California for the cannabis market: Happy Frog potting soil, $27 a cubic foot, and Grow Natural Humboldt Nutrients, $97 a gallon. So we did a lot of tests using hemp as a surrogate, making special blends. We mixed the Tagro potting soil with char, and it was a little bit better than the regular Tagro potting soil. It was a hell of a lot better than the Happy Frog, which we also tested. And at this point, one of the big markets for the Tacoma potting soil is the cannabis industry, and they pay top dollar. So what's also good about that is you can take the spent soils and the spent excess plant material and get a tip fee for welcoming it back into your compost industry. So to conclude, there are many, many markets out there. This is my own terrace at my apartment, and you can see we make the world a little prettier with our compost blends in our very unusual pot planter here. But there are many markets for compost outside of the traditional agriculture. And if you work on testing and developing specialty products to cater to those markets, it can increase your sales, your profits, and your visibility. And that's all I have.
Sally, thank you so much for that. And I love your innovation on your how you have your window plants. Okay, we're going to switch now to Gary. And please put your questions in the chat. I see several there now, and we'll get to them all. Gary, please go ahead.
You, Neil, appreciate it. Very nice, Sally, as always. And she really provided a great opportunity to allow me to segue into, so what the heck do I do with all these opportunities? How do I go from not really knowing a lot, if you're new to the industry, if you're trying to start a facility, to if I am doing it for a while, how do I get into these different markets? Because there's a lot of opportunities out there for compost, some very specialized, as Sally outlined, and some more traditional like agriculture. So what I'm going to try to provide here in a relatively short period of time is just a general overview of compost marketing. I conduct this presentation with the Compost Operators Training course here in Raleigh, North Carolina. We hold every year in September, a little plug, but that's through the U.S. Composting Council and then the CFRS, the folks there that help put that on. So I am going to see if I can get my screen to, uh-oh, why don't we go down here? Doesn't want to move. I always love it when you have these technical problems. Get rid of this. I'm on screen, move. There we go. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is just talk real briefly here. What is marketing? You can look this up. I like these two particular examples. It's really a function of, promoting and selling your product or services. For us, obviously, it's a product, Compost itself, and it's a strategic function. And it really is a lot of strategy when you look at marketing. You want to focus on what kind of groups you're going after. As Sally outlined, there are a lot of opportunities out there, and there are different ways of doing that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Marketing versus sales, they are very different. So I really believe that marketing is the foundation of sales. You start to market, your role in marketing is determining prospects before you actually are able to turn them into what I call actual revenue producing customers. Different things you're going to look at is keeping your market informed about your products and your company and yourself. You're going to look at different market segments. All that's going to allow to create sales for your business, which obviously is going to allow you to be more successful and to actually stay in business. I found there's really two primary type of compost customers that we deal with. We have the intermediate, which are more like your retailers. Those are the ones that are reselling your product. Maybe a garden center, a soil march yard, maybe a distributor that you work with. And then you have your ultimate customer. Those are the ones that you sell maybe to directly. If you're a facility that has your residents, your landscapers come in, an agriculture customer, someone had put in the chat what a DOT is. It's a Department of Transportation, as Chris outlined. So those are all ultimate customers. Those are the two segments of customers that you want to try to understand how you're going to focus your marketing on and what ultimately you want to sell to. So what is the primary goal of marketing? Well, quite frankly, it's effectively, and that's a key term here, sell all the compost that you've produced. Now, how do you do that? Quite frankly, you may not be able to right away. I mean, it takes a little bit of work. It takes obviously the marketing as we're talking about, but one of the key things you have to be able to be focused on is understanding that you've got to produce a good quality product consistently. That's going to allow you to get those repeat sales. If you go out there and you do not have a good quality product, you may get some initial business, but it's going to be a challenge to maintain those customers. The quality of product absolutely will directly impact your ability to market it and the saleability of your product. That's something with the product that I represent with McGill. We have phenomenal results from our product, and it's allowed my job and my salespeople's job to be much, much easier. So what is some of the strategies to sell your product? So one of the things you're going to do is learn the value of your compost. And the next slide is really going to focus a little bit on that, but that's a key term that I believe our industry has got to focus on. We've got to maintain that our product has a huge value. You want to learn how to convey that to your prospective customers and how you're going to demonstrate that. So the biggest way of looking at building the value of your product is understanding that this product is truly an environmentally profitable product. It's something that it's not just waste. Our industry talks about food waste and yard waste and all those things that do make up our end use product, our compost itself. But we need to make sure that people understand that this isn't just something that we're just trying to get rid of. It's something we're manufacturing. It's something that's got value to them and to being able to utilize it out into the environment. So just looking at a sales and marketing plan, I put together just 6 kind of key elements that I'll briefly touch on each of them. As you can see, the 5th one there, education, extremely, extremely important. Just the information that Sally outlined shows you how important education is going to be able to get into those particular market segments that she briefly touched on. So from a market and sales perspective, your facility is extremely important. You've got to understand that, you've got a seasonal product. Obviously, the colder areas, your season's shorter. I'm in North Carolina. Ours is a little bit more elongated. We also have facilities up in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Our season's a little shorter there. We've got to understand how to control that inventory, making sure we've got the ability to store it, to have good, sufficient inventory when the season kicks off. We want to make sure that the facility's clean, not only for the regulators and our neighbors, if you're close to neighbors out there that have some odor challenges, but also to make sure the product is also going to be clean. You're not going to have that contamination. Sally mentioned that plastics and glass, it may be viable. Certain markets, some other markets have zero tolerance for that. You obviously want to make sure you've got the right equipment on hand. If you're going to be loading smaller trucks or smaller trailers versus larger tractor trailers, enough staff, and they've got to be trained. And if you're going to be more challenged with more seasons, make sure you've got some part-time help and things like that. And then from a facility perspective, using that as a place to demonstrate and to do some walkthroughs is extremely beneficial from a marketing sales perspective. From a product perspective, I mentioned quality. I think that is extremely important, as I've mentioned, that it's something that you've got to continue to be focused on, making sure you understand how your product is going to fit into these different market segments. Again, Sally talked about some of these different opportunities, be it the cannabis, the DOTs, the ag. I mean, there's all kind of great opportunities out there. You need to know, how is your product going to fit into those markets? The next one is market research. This is by far the most important initial stage of your marketing. You need to understand what exactly you're going to put together to have your product available and to be successful. I'm extremely focused on projections. It helps operations tremendously. We're a really large organization, but I think this is viable for anyone that's starting out to something new, to a company maybe as large as McGill. You're going to evaluate your competition, obviously. That's a huge part of marketing research, looking at what your customers are. If you're going to work with maybe the Department of Transportation's, yes, you can have maybe a little bit more contaminations, but if you're going to get into more of the sports field, we do a lot with them. They're extremely focused on carbon nitrogen ratio, limited to no type of contaminations. So those are things you've got to be cognizant of when you're looking at your product for your customer expectations. You're going to do evaluations of what type of distribution you're going to do and what your demand is, and that kind of ties into your projections themselves. All right. So again, some of the things you are going to consider for your market research, your competition is very important. It's not only other composters out there. A lot of people look at our product and they just call it soil. So you're going to look at what other topsoil only type of opportunities are, because we are not topsoil. We are compost. We can make manufactured topsoils, but we got to be understand we are differentiated from that. I think one of our, if not our biggest competitor out there is synthetic fertilizers, especially if you're into the agriculture market. We do happen to do a lot of work with row crops like corn and soybean, because our Eastern North Carolina facilities right in the middle of agriculture companies, and we do lose a lot of business to synthetic fertilizer companies because they come in and they try to compete against us. Looking at your feedstocks, I mentioned that, very important. How's that going to play into what type of products you're going to develop? A pricing structure. You don't want to be too expensive. Obviously, you're not going to sell, but you also want to make sure you build that value into your product. How is it going to be transported from a function of the product, the material that's coming in, to are you going to deliver it? Are you going to have large tractor trailers, smaller type of dump truck deliveries, and obviously technical expertise? And I'll talk a little bit about that from the education speech coming up here in a second. Just some of the things you're going to look at when you're preparing a marketing plan. This is a 2-hour presentation I conduct at the COTC. So obviously I'm not going to be able to get into a lot of deep dive into these things, but these are just some of the elements you're going to look at when you are preparing a marketing plan. The next one is promotion. This is probably the most exciting one from marketing. I'm a huge from branding your product. Sally mentioned some of the brands in her presentation. We've got several ones that we developed here at my company. And then you're going to talk about advertising and how you're going to promote. And you've got to look at how you can do that consistently. If you're going to do one-offs, you're not going to have a lot of success. I can tell you that. And it's not cheap. Developing a website, utilizing social media, I touch on that at the end. Brochures and point of sale material, extremely important. Things that can be done relatively fairly easily on your computer to doing something more advanced. If you're going to use a marketing company, it can do those as well. Testimonials, phenomenal way of getting more people to know about your product and sell. I'm a huge believer in being involved in trade associations, be it turfgrass, be it the NRCS, the extension agencies. There's a lot of opportunities there, and you can either attend trade shows. The U.S. Composting Council's event every year is a great way, or exhibit at different trade shows. I mentioned product branding. I'm just a big believer in that because I think it does help to build value. You go to a grocery store, you see products that you're comfortable with. Those are the ones that people feel comfortable purchasing. They believe there's a higher quality there. They perceive it has a good positive image. All those things are very beneficial that you can build your product, your compost products to get to that level. Trademark them if you can. It may not be something you do initially, but I think it is viable. We do trademark our products, and look at how you're going to develop those brand logos as well. You want to have a neat, good color scheme, good uniformity as well. I mentioned education is extremely important. The most important thing you've got to do is educate yourself. I started in this industry really not knowing a lot about compost. I did a lot of reading, a lot of research, obviously talked to a lot of people that we sold to, and I listened. I mean, that's something that you can do, is let other folks help educate you. And now when I go in and I work with especially golf course superintendents, farmers that really know their business, I need to come across as the expert. And I don't come across saying like I know more than they. I just want them to understand I do have a good understanding of my product and my company and how it's going to benefit them, so I can help close the sale. That's going to lend yourself to being able to educate your customers, and then that is obviously a big part of your marketing. You're going to be able to create a lot of credibility when you could do that. I get a lot of folks call me up, ask me for feedback because I've developed that over the years that I've been in the industry. Some of the ways you can do that: local programs, extension agencies. If you want to get into the agriculture community, it's a great opportunity. Landscape and nursery associations, again, these trade associations are great. Master gardeners, wonderful, get involved with them. And obviously go to industry trade shows. I mentioned the USCC. Every state usually has different shows that you can go to. Once you develop that knowledge, you can start to conduct your own seminars. Webinars like this are a good way of doing it. You can start offering CEUs or continuing education credits that'll help create more increase for people to come to you. And when you do this, make sure you structure your presentation based on the audience. If it's an agriculture audience, obviously you want to focus on that. If it's a sports turf audience, maybe homeowners or something like that, make sure you structure your presentation around that. So here's just some of the different elements that you can utilize for consumer compost education. Product literature, again, you can make it done professionally, but you can do this on your own. It's really not that difficult to develop Word docs and turn them into PDFs. Demonstration sites at your facilities. Sally mentioned community gardens. We participate in them. A great way of getting a great marriage with you and your community. Public presentations. I've conducted many lunch and learns throughout my tenure here. Articles in local press, especially if you're new and you're starting up, they're always looking for something neat, something unique to put in there. Talking about you as a composting facility starting up in your community is a great way to do that as well. Looking for product certification, and as I mentioned in the beginning, facility tours are great as well. That's why you want to make sure your facility looks neat, looks nice, so when you do bring people in, they get a better understanding of what exactly you do. The sixth key element is sales and distribution strategies, and that's really just trying to determine how you're going to sell your product after you develop your marketing. And this is really a function of who you're going to sell it to and how you're going to go out there and do it. As I mentioned, retailers or resellers are really beneficial. You can certainly reach a large mass as opposed to maybe just doing it at your site. That's a great way to start, of course, but that's a great opportunity if you're in a position to do that. Some folks do online selling, especially if you're doing bag product and things like that. So there's a lot of variety of being able to develop a strategy for distributing and selling your product itself. So here's just 5 marketing challenges that I felt that a small business had that I found online. Spending money on advertising, that's a challenge. A lot of folks, when you're starting out, especially, or even as you get larger, it takes a lot of money to advertise. It really does. So you want to make sure whichever avenue you choose, you make sure you're using one that you think is going to get a good return for you. Look at those different partnerships, your resellers out there. Are they really good partners for you? Are they representing you and your company and your product in the right light? Because if not, it's a reflection on you, something you want to be cognizant of as well. Keeping your customers engaged. That's going to be social medias. I'll touch on in a second. A great way of doing that, getting out in the community, making sure you're just getting your product out there. If you do have customers, you want to make sure you're communicating with them, be it visiting them, doing emails, phone calls. These are all ways of making sure your customers are engaged. If you're doing homeowners, social media, again, is a great way, signage. So there's a lot of opportunity of doing that. You want to get your employees to be passionate about you. We conduct education seminars each year to make sure our employees understand what we do and to make them understand what a wonderful thing we're doing from a sustainable perspective. And, when the owner of the company came up with that some years ago, I just really embraced it. I thought it was a great way of getting our folks in the back that are working our equipment to understand what we do out in the field as well as what they're doing and how that product lends itself to what it does from a sustainable perspective. And again, educating your customers about your products and the benefits of them. So some of the things you can do to develop a sales and marketing strategy, just kind of wrap it up a little bit here. Setting up a pricing structure, very important. Not the easiest thing to do when you're starting out. Even when you go and you start to develop a large customer base like we have, you've got to be cognizant of your distance from your facility. How does freight play into it? What are your competitors? So all those factors play into what you're going to do from a pricing structure. Information management systems, CRM they're called, that can be very basic, something where you just do it on a spreadsheet, to utilizing companies like Salesforce or other ones that are out there. You want to record your sales. We do that. We do customer agreements. Every time I go in and visit a customer, I show them where their sales are compared to last year. Gives them an opportunity to tell me what they're seeing, what their challenges are, what their benefits are going, and things like that. I mentioned it's important to make sure you've got a good sales staff that are educated and passionate. You may hire brokers to do it. Promotional materials, always very beneficial. And then again, primarily get out there, talk to your prospective customers. That's extremely, extremely important. Last 2 slides are really just focused on social media. Most of you folks probably are familiar with that, but it is a great, great way of getting your product and your company and yourself known out there. I think it's probably the most best value from a cost perspective. There's a lot of challenges with social media, what's being put on there, the time it takes. So there's things that you've really got to be aware of. Here are just some of the basic things that our marketing folks at U.S. Composting Council had provided. He conducted a presentation with me some years ago, and I really like what they put out there. Just state who you are, post again why your product does what it does, the customers that need it, the benefits of your product, and then how often you do it, at least twice a month. The more often, the more beneficial to a certain level you want to get to. So with that, I like to say, I see compost as just a piece of the puzzle. That's something that you need to be aware of, is that we fit into different marketing segments really, really well. But as you can see, there's a lot of opportunities with marketing and selling our compost. So good luck, and appreciate your time.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, Sally. 2 terrific, helpful, and thorough presentations. Before we go to the questions, I want to point out, years ago, I worked in cosmetics manufacturing at a factory producing cosmetics. And the message we learned was the same that both Sally and Gary just presented: quality control and pay attention to customer needs. Those were the lessons we learned years ago. Having said that, I see that there's a very active chat. Rick had one question. Rick Anthony had one question, which I will put out there. What about PFAS? if Sally and Gary could address that important question, that would be helpful. Sally, did you want to start?
Sure. So PFAS are forever chemicals or perfluorinated organic compounds. You can detect them everywhere you look, including rainfall, household dust, blood, feces, and they're of concern. The two longest compounds have been phased out for over 20 years for use in the US, and they get a lot of headlines in scientific papers. If you look at the actual potential risk from compost, the source in compost most likely is food packaging, where they are present in several orders of magnitude higher than in any compost. Source control is your best approach here, and communication is your best approach. So 3M, who has manufactured a lot of these compounds, is phasing out of manufacture. And it's a question of communication. So for example, Glide dental floss has PFAS concentrations of about the same as in the Tacoma biosolids that I talked about. And the question then is, which would you rather put in your mouth? The Glide dental floss or the biosolids? And that type of communication gets it across.
Thank you for that very graphic example.
Hey, you'll remember that.
I will, believe me, I will. This evening, I will remember that. Gary, did you have a comment?
I do. From a practical perspective, Sally mentioned communication, and I think education is the other thing that we need to make sure that people understand, and that's communicating to either your customers or the public out there what Sally outlined, what are PFAS, and how they're everywhere. It's not just a biosolids-based compost or a food waste-based compost, and making sure they understand, the regulations that are not in place, and that the EPA is working on that. The U.S. Composting Council, I'm on the board. The USCC, we've got a lot of focus on PFAS right now. We're working with the lobbyists to try to get Washington to understand how this is impacting our composting facilities, and that we need to get them to put more efforts into making folks realize that we are the recipients of things that we can't control, but we also want to make sure we've got good quality, clean compost out there that people feel comfortable utilizing.
I'm going to read one other question that I see from Gabriel Sanchez. What ratio of browns to greens is best for native plant restoration? Sally, did you want to go first, and then Gary?
I'm really good at using and trying different kinds of compost and making it. There are other people that know a lot more than I do.
Okay. Gary, did you want to address that?
I would say, and I'm going to defer to, you can actually look online and get a much more detailed from, what types of nitrogen and carbon, because there are good CN ratios, carbon to nitrogen ratios that you need to make quality compost. So I think it depends a little bit. Are you going to try to do it yourself? If you're doing a little backyard composting, that's going to be different than a larger manufacturer such as the company I work for. But there is obviously certain standards that you've got to maintain to get a good quality product out there. So I'm not trying to defer the answer as much as, to Sally's point, there are people that are more knowledgeable about that. I'm a marketing and sales guy, but I do my own composting. So I try to make sure when I test it that I've got a good amount of nitrogen as well as my carbon in there as well. And that's going to affect your end product as well. The more nitrogen that you are able to utilize making your compost, a little bit higher, richer compost you're going to have. And that works for certain market segments, especially agriculture or sports fields, more beneficial.
Thank you. Thank you both. I see that Rick Aho from Divert Organics is on our call. And a few hours ago, I had a conversation with him about how to find out what the pricing if you wanted to purchase these materials. So, Rick, did you want to fill us in for a minute or two? Rick, can you hear me? Did you want to respond? I think you're Rick. I don't think you're. You have to get. There you go. You're on mute, Rick.
There we go.
Okay, thanks.
So I guess there's a lot of resources available out there. I mean, this is a great presentation and I'm really glad you put it on. But as far as compost marketing, NERC has some great resources. All you have to do is Google compost marketing with NERC in front of it, and you'll come up with some resources that are, there's a lot of them and they're very good. And
Rick, let me interrupt and just say that NERC is the Northeast Recycling Council for folks who want to follow up.
Okay. The other one is SARE, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's a governmental agency, and they also have a lot of resources that, can give you, everybody's different. And I think Sally and Gary did a great job on, pointing that out and, looking at like the NERC program slideshow is like 90 pages. So it gives you an opportunity to, pick and choose what you want. You're looking for quality and cost and, what it takes to engage your community. So it's, pulling these resources together is, it's nice to have, and, just bookmark them.
Yeah, Rick also mentioned that if you want to find out the local price marketing on the market, you could go get in touch with your Walmart or your other big box store who sell these materials.
Right. They have a Walmart. If you go to walmart.com, all you have to do is plug in a zip code and they'll send you to wherever you want to be. And, the bottom line is Walmart's your competitor. And knowing, as both Sally and Gary pointed out, knowing your competition and what you have to do to get the job done. You're not going to compete with Walmart, but what you can compete for is community engagement. That's, everybody wants to have to do the right thing, to do the green thing. It comes down to, how much is it going to cost them? So, getting a comparison and seeing, what you have to do against the Miracle Grow bag, which is, they probably spend more on the bag than they do on the material inside, but it gives people confidence in what you're buying, and that's what you want to do with your engagement.
I have to interrupt you, Rick, because again, a lesson from my days as a cosmetics manufacturer, the bottle and the label cost more than the ingredients of the cologne and other products. So I guess that may be a universal in many, not universal, but in many products.
Yeah. And I put in the chat, maybe we can, Zero Waste USA can host another webinar that can kind of attack, what composting technologies are out there, what kind of innovation is available to provide additional marketability to your systems that are out there.
We will consider that. As I said, Rick, this webinar that we have Sally and Gary addressing is because of feedback from our previous ones. So we will put that in the hopper and get back to you and others. At this point, Rick and Chris, if you've been following the chat, could you read us some of the questions there?
Yes, sir. I have several here. Eileen Baines. Eileen Baines had a question. Who are and where do you find experts for helping us develop and sell products?
So a lot of the work that I referenced, I did. And there are land grant universities across the US, and they are typically, some have deeper expertise in compost and organics, but they're very good at designing trials and tests. And that's a great way to partner. And also these tests are typically done by a graduate student, and so you end up with someone who's an expert at the end as well.
Yes. We've partnered with NC State, Virginia Tech, University of Maryland in our facility areas, all very beneficial, what Sally said. I will tell you, U.S. Composting Council, the local state chapters, if not all states have them. North Carolina Composting Council has a state chapter, Virginia, so California. So there's a lot of opportunities. You can just go online and see a lot of information. Just be a little careful. Not all of it is exactly accurate, but I would say the U.S. Composting Council website is a great resource to start out with, as well as extension agencies if you're going to get involved. A little bit depends on the market segment you want to get involved with, or if you're trying to compost itself. But USCC is a good resource, in my opinion.
Okay, it's already been answered in the chat, but Dennis had a question. How does phosphorus end up in the soil and what does it do? Are we okay with what was in the chat, or should we just, do you have an answer that you'd like to give quickly on that?
Chris, why don't you read the response in the chat, and then Sally and Gary can comment.
Okay. Let's see here. Two comments, one from Gabrielle Sanchez. A lot of phosphorus comes from ag runoff, and when it gets into the water, it causes large algal blooms, which eventually creates an anoxic waterway when the algae dies. And I also wrote back, it's important to understand that nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, NPK, are the three things found in common artificial commercial fertilizers. They are primary components of plant needs to thrive. The concern is overuse of fertilizers can cause runoff problems that Gabrielle spoke about. To that end, natural fertilizers like bone meal for phosphorus, important to some bulbs, for example, and compost are less likely to cause burn or algal bloom in nearby waterways.
So you're partly right.
Okay.
Agricultural runoff of phosphorus is a major concern. However, urban areas, which is going to be a bigger focus for a lot of compost use and where you're going to potentially have regulations on phosphorus fertilization, it's all soil runoff, because phosphorus is not soluble and does not go through a soil profile like nitrogen does.
Right.
Different sources of phosphorus are more soluble and more available. And it's a big concern, and I have a column coming on this in Biocycle, and Ron Alexander has written some excellent columns on this in Biocycle. And I would say for urban areas, phosphorus is a bigger concern than nitrogen in most cities, and to search for Biocycle Ron Alexander phosphorus, and you'll get great answers.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So the next question is from Gary Liss. Are biosolid composts okay to use on food crops?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And we've been.
I'm a living testament to that.
And likewise, my company's been in business for over 30 years, and it's amazing the positive feedback we get from a lot of customers on what they see, the results. But I will tell you, as my number 5 key element, education is really important, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. So you've got to be cognizant on how you're going to present that, be it to your retailers if you're going to sell through a particular customer, or to the consumer themselves. Because once I usually get those calls, I explain to them, as I tell them they've got the option, but they usually are not aware of all the regulations and how beneficial biosolids-based compost can be for their gardens.
Okay, thank you, thank you. The next question also from Gary Liss. Wait a minute. Yeah, have other states done demonstration grants to measure the performance of compost for particular markets like California did in the 1990s?
Well, actually, let me comment on that, because I do know that the USDA has a grant application out now that, among other things, is requiring grant recipients to use their grant to provide data on how compost increases productivity in urban agriculture. And that's a current grant application right now. So we'll be getting more information when those projects are funded and the data comes back in.
Sally, Gary?
We did a paper on this, looking at different composts and biosolids-based product, and you get very different results on the different products, and that's why I would recommend testing and coming up with the most effective blends.
Yeah, a lot depends on where it's going to go, because what Sally's tested out in Washington State certainly can be different. What's here in the East Coast and North Carolina, we find that as one of the things that people need to be aware of. Soils different throughout the country, different levels of organic matter and so forth. One of the best researches I think that I've ever seen is the Soils for Salmon program out there in Washington State. I reference that when I present. So there are a lot of opportunities to see things online that you can find a lot of studies that have been conducted. Just be aware of how that may play into where you're actually at.
And what you're trying to do.
Right, what you're trying to grow and things like that, right?
Thank you. Kat Smith had a question. Is there any requirement/regulation regarding PFAS testing for compostable packaging?
Not yet. We're aware of.
Gary and Sally, do you think that would be a useful project to do that testing? Would that be helpful to you in the industry?
Come on, come up. There you go.
It's
It wouldn't change my life.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's an innovative answer. I appreciate.
I mean, the key is so right now you don't have to say if you use the various forms of PFAS, you don't have to declare it. There's some states that have regulations saying phase this out, don't do this anymore. That's going to be the major market driver regulation rather than testing
I see.
for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there can be a positive there, that we're moving things forward and they're getting more information out there, because there's just so much misinformation about PFAS. And you take up in the Northeast where, they've enacted regulations that have really impacted composting facilities. Unfortunately, kind of like phosphorus, soils need phosphorus. Unfortunately, there's too much was utilized in the past, but there just needs to be more focus on, from where it's coming from. And I think that'll benefit us as composters out there.
Chris, did you have other questions from the
Neil, there was one question that just came up from Allison Allen. She said, could you put the grant information you just mentioned in the chat? And I'll go on to the next question, which was, let's see, again from Gary Liss. How important is using STA certified compost, USCC seal of testing assurance? How much does that enhance the value obtained from selling products?
It's how.
The educated consumer is your best customer.
Okay,
I would say it's a fabulous tool.
Yeah, we've been involved with it since it started 20 years ago or so. And when I present to landscape architects, engineering firms, it's always the thing that I try to get them to understand is to specify STA certified compost seal testing assurance. It just gives a really good comfort level. It's kind of like the good housekeeping soil, Carfax or whatever, and it can differentiate you from other composters that aren't part of it. I'm not saying that their compost is not good, because that may not be the case, but it certainly is a nice little marketing tool, and it does give a nice comfort level for folks that understand that you have something that you can show them that you're, be it the analysis, committed to the industry, committed to producing a high quality product.
Awesome.
Chris, on the question of the specifics of the USDA grant program, I'm going to ask Rick Aho to respond to that, because I know that he's working with grassroots groups to put in a grant proposal in the city of Detroit. The grassroots groups are in the city of Detroit.
Okay,
So
fantastic. Rick Aho, if you could put that in the chat, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it may be too late for this year's round of grants, but there will be another round, another round next year. I also want to put out mention that there are many other federal grant programs that could address composting, and I will put together a listing. Actually, our colleague at Zero Waste USA, Gary Liss, who's on this call, put together a comprehensive list of all the federal grant programs, and I will get that out there. I need advice from Chris and Chris Sparnicht and Rick Anthony on the best way to reach all of the people on this call, but we will get that list out to you. And thank you for that question.
Fantastic. Dennis actually had a question coming up, but I think I want to supersede that with another question he just asked. He says, I want to follow up on Gary's comment on biosolids if there's time. What are the main differences between biosolids, human waste, dog waste, cow manure? Is it just that biosolids are processed and the rest are not?
So biosolids are treated, if they're going to be something that you can use in your home garden, you're guaranteed that they won't have pathogens, and that's an EPA required testing, and also there are methods that are allowed to make sure that the stuff has no pathogens, because they're coming from thousands of households typically. You have very regular concentrations and consistency in a product, and you're not going to have weed seeds. So in terms of safety, you have guarantees on a regulated basis that's enforced. And then in terms of product quality, you have a very uniform product, low contamination, and no weed seeds.
Awesome.
Yeah, I concur with that. A couple of our facilities are green waste and food waste, and we have more challenges there with contamination than we do on the facilities that are more focused on biosolids, even though most of those do pre-consumer food waste. It is a really clean, good nitrogen source, very regulated. So, you know, again, it's just a misconception out there a lot of times on people, what do they do and do not understand about biosolids. Metals has always been one of the earlier concerns that people were afraid that it had high metal content. I remember being in one of our customers, and a landscaper happened to come in and say, I love your stuff, but I can't use it in my vegetable garden. And I asked him why, and it's because your metals are high. I pulled out the STA analysis and I showed him exactly what the EPA limits were and how low our compost was compared to those EPA limits. And he was blown away. And again, education.
Very helpful. Gary, I want to ask a question. I know you're based in North Carolina. Could you just give an indication of where your company's plants are located in other states?
Yeah, we have two, and we can always go to our website, obviously, but we have two in North Carolina. We got one in Virginia. We have a public-private partnership in South Carolina, in Charleston. We have a company has two facilities in New Jersey. We literally are opening up one today outside of Philadelphia in Fairless Hills. It's just taking in the first material. And then we have another one down in Florida that we own, and one that we help manage in Florida also. So pretty much along the East Coast.
Great.
Thank you. Are you handling all the? I remember years ago, Neil, that we were in Carolinas, and they had a huge issue with pig waste from the pig farms. And are you guys handling that stuff? It's right there for you, right?
No, we don't really do anything with the hog farmers. There is a company out there that does do some hog waste, and that's close to one of our facilities in the eastern part of the state. But we used to do some things with poultry litter, but for the most part, you know, we don't really use much agricultural waste in our facilities at all.
Well, interesting.
Chris, back to you with any additional questions.
Oh, we've got plenty of questions here. I'd like to follow up again with Dennis Uyat's questions. He has two. What does soil testing, who does soil testing, and how is it compost graded? And what are the problems, contaminants, and their prevention strategies? Those are kind of broad. Who'd like to tackle that?
Well, I'll talk about the soil testing. I'm not sure. So from a soil testing perspective, it's something that that we really recommend, because a lot of folks, especially landscapers, they're just used to putting out a program and they just throw it out there, be it synthetics or utilizing compost. So whenever I present, especially to the landscape or golf course industry, sports field industry, I try to get them to understand the benefits of soil testing. Most golf courses, superintendents, because they're very cost focused, they understand how important it is to determine how much NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium they're putting out. So soil testing is really beneficial to see what your pH level is and things like that in your soil, and how your compost, again, doing your analysis, STA analysis, will help to do that. I developed a spreadsheet years ago that helps to show how much compost you can use depending on the results from the soil test.
Okay.
A soil test will also tell you how much carbon and nitrogen and total organic matter is from the total
Huge.
carbon, and that's a really great tool to say, do I have good soil or lousy soil? And for contamination, one of the big things that people think of when they say contaminants is things like metals, which Gary talked about, but on a practical level, contamination in compost is glass, plastic, metal, things you don't want under your rose bush.
Yeah.
And this is a huge issue with food scrap composting. And a recent study came out, I don't remember, it was 20% or 40% of expenses at compost sites are getting contaminants out of the product. So outreach, education are huge here. And one of the new potential hopeful things, you're starting to see a range of home appliances that'll grind and dehydrate your food scraps, and they make it food cycler, mill, or two names, and they make it really easy to keep contaminants out. And so that's a really hopeful path of the future.
As long as people realize it's not compost, it's something that should go to a compost facility.
Yeah, and Lomi was one that had initially been calling their material compost. Ron's written about that again in Biocycle. I've written about that again in Biocycle. I've worked with Mill and made it very clear from the start, don't you dare call yourselves compost, because you're not. And you're seeing more and more. It's hard though, because these appliances are making something that nobody knows what it is. And compost is a great, people know what compost is. It looks kind of like compost. So
The term I've heard in the
that is
trade,
starting.
the term I've heard in the trade is CLO, compost-like output. CLO.
Yeah. How far is that going to get you?
Yeah, it's, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm working with Mill on this. How do you use it in a compost pile? How do you use it in a garden? You can use it in a garden, but it is not compost. You got to be careful.
Excellent. Eileen Banira says, how can you get to test your products? Who can you get to test your products? Farms we've used don't keep stats, so do you use, i.e. ag or horticulture students? Not really sure. I guess she's asking, who do you get to test your products? Would you suggest talking to somebody at an ag school who's a student to help you with that, or something along those lines?
You need a faculty. The students aren't going to know. But another thing that you can do that can be cheaper and can be super effective is, if you're making different blends, work with master gardeners in your area. If this is what you want your end use to be, say, try this, which is better? What would you say? What do you like? What do you dislike about this? Here are my different blends. Test them out.
Right. I guess I was confused. Was she asking from a practical perspective, like Sally outlined, test them and actually putting them in the ground, or were you talking about doing some sort of an analysis? Because there are companies out there that can certainly test to see what your product, what it has in it, and you do different labs will test for you that. But to Sally's point, master gardeners are a great source as well, and doing demonstration plots on your own that you can put out there as well. And that's a great way if you've got a facility where you bring people in, you show the results, you put in tomato plants. And I used my compost here compared to, we've seen some of our customers do this compared to traditional Miracle Grow or something like that. You see a tremendous difference, and that really is a visual perspective that people appreciate.
Okay. Next question is from Travis Carpenter. How does public perception affect sales and marketing of compost? Does winning the hearts and minds of non-customers affect how easy it is to sell? For example, public pressure on local government to have the DOT use compost in constructing right of way might be important in addition to the business case.
I would say that if people know your product and are familiar with your product and they have ownership in your product, that they help make it. Like when they flush, they get to help make Tagro. When they put stuff in the green bin, they get to help make whatever the brand Dillo dirt, or, you know, if it's a known local commodity that people can take pride in, that'll help local sales, not necessarily governmental sales. If it's widespread and recognized enough, then when somebody goes to the DOT and say, use this, they won't say, use what? They'll say, oh, I use that in my house.
Yeah, our public-private relationship down in Charleston, South Carolina is a great example where we give a percentage of our sales back to the county, was part of the program.
Oh.
And all the advertising that we've done out there has focused on supporting your local retailers. When we first took over that facility, they were selling it directly out of the facility itself, which is pretty common for municipalities. One of the challenges are, you know, then all the retailers in the market, most of them were actually bringing compost from farther away because they couldn't compete against that. And so it took a little bit to overcome that perspective of, you know, well, it's going to be more expensive selling it through, but it allowed them to become more engaged in their community, letting them know that they're using something that, being their food waste and their yard waste, was part of that product itself. So yes, I mean, I think it's a definite way of improving the perception of your product for sure. It has to be educated and marketed properly, though.
From Chris, I want to ask a question. From my perspective, what's happening in composting now as a solid waste management strategy or approach, the supply side is going to grow tremendously over the next few years. I liken what's happening in composting of municipal solid waste now is to back where recycling started in the late 60s, early 70s. It's going to capture the hearts and minds. So the question is, in my opinion, the supply side is going to increase as cities and counties move, mainly because of citizen demand, as in my part of the country here in the mid-Atlantic area. Is the infrastructure throughout the country capable of handling more and more materials? Gary, I see you have an opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the biggest challenges, especially in communities that want to do food waste collections and things like that. You've got to be prepared. You know, if you saturate the market with too much product, then you lose that value that we talked about. You know, it really is kind of a chicken and an egg scenario, in my opinion. We have a lot more opportunity to bring in materials than, quite frankly, and we're a big company, that we actually have to be able to sell. So it's developing the market, making sure that you are marketing it properly out there, getting the Department of Transportation to understand they need to utilize it. It's all challenges. So to your point, Neil, I mean, yes, it can easily overwhelm the amount of product that can be put out in the market for sure.
Yep.
Okay. Alberto Diaz says, hello, I'm Alberto Diaz from the Global Zero Waste. What parameters do you think should be included in the composting law in any country?
Well, I'll add that in terms of living in urban areas, I think mandatory household separation of food scraps is required for collection and processing efficiency. So I think that's one rule, which is happening.
Compostable organics, yard trimming as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Rick.
I'll give you a good example real quick. I was in the Newark airport last week, and there were the three bins. You had, you know, your landfill, the recyclables, and then you had organics, which I'm just amazed because I don't think anyone's taken those organics that actually go in the right bin to a compost facility, but I didn't have anybody to ask. But I sit there and I was standing right beside it waiting for my flight, and invariably people were putting the wrong things in the bins.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking all they need to do is put pictures on these things. So there's a
Yes.
lot of, again, education. And I just would just shake my head because people would look and they saw where someone threw a plastic cup in the organics, and so they would drop a plastic cup in there because they didn't know. So
I've
frustrating.
witnessed the same thing. My wife has to pull me when we're at an airport. She has to pull me away from looking into all the bins to see how effective they are. But I agree. I have not seen at various airports. I've seen the organics bin, but I have not seen materials without contamination in them. And I'm
Invariably.
sure that material, if it is composted, it's going to cost a whole lot to screen out the
Um,
non-organic
But,
matter.
to the
To-
question, go
to
ahead,
go-
Sally, I'm sorry.
To go back to the question, I think it's really good to have standards for how to make compost. And that includes ways to verify pathogen kill, and also to reduce methane emissions during composting. And so I think those are critical for any international.
How about since it's a international law or country law, how about banning polluting fertilizers like synthetics?
That, that's lovely in a dreamscape. It's not going to happen for a long time. What you're seeing, and I had a slide about this, how USDA is starting to incentivize farm use of compost and other organics. That's a way to do it. You're not going to get fertilizer bans. There's, first of all, one thing to understand is there's not enough compost feedstocks to go around to compensate. You're seeing a big growth in regenerative agriculture, in alternative types of grazing and growing. That's a lot of education outreach. You're asking for something that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you don't have enough facilities in those areas to make it feasible to actually decompost out. I mean, that's one of the reasons we're able to sell to row crop farmers, like I mentioned in my presentation, because we're right in the middle of that area where they come in, drop the crops off, they can pick it up on their trucks and take it back to their farms. But our other facilities, we can't compete. You can't compete with synthetics. And out in the Midwest, there's nowhere near the amount of composting facilities in the middle of farm country that it needs to be.
The other thing is to realize
please,
that
go ahead, Seth.
internationally, I just have to say this, more than half the world doesn't have access to working toilets with collection and treatment. And you're saying stop using I mean, we got a ways to go here.
Yeah, Gary, on your point, you indicated that many of your company's facilities are on the East Coast. Two questions: how far afield could you market your product, which of course is heavy and might limit the distance, and how far afield can you get supply of material from a city or a food manufacturing plant?
So part A, traditionally, we usually focus on 50 to 75 miles away
Okay.
from a delivery perspective,
Mhm.
but it depends a little bit on the market segment. I mentioned we do a lot especially in the golf course market, and we've sold 150 plus miles sometimes. I mean,
Oh,
they're willing to pay a little bit more for the product.
sure.
We have a very high quality, well screened product that they like. So it depends on the market segment. Agriculture, 15 miles maybe, unless you're going to get into the higher value products like Sally mentioned in her presentation. They've got more money, they can do it. From an intake perspective, that's growing. We do have some folks that are probably 150 miles away, some biosolids that we're bringing in, because those communities are focused on sustainability and the landfill costs. We bring things from the Northeast all the way down to our Virginia facility. So that we're less expensive than landfill tipping fees.
And I'm assuming it's truck transportation
Yes,
to
correct.
your
Yeah, we don't do any
facility.
rail, right?
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Those numbers are very, very helpful. Chris, do we have anything else in the chat?
We have one more,
Okay.
once again from Dennis Uyat, who asks, in the Southeast Los Angeles, where I grew up, Exide battery recycler spewed lead in East Los Angeles and Southeast Los Angeles communities for decades. For these soils, is it better to remove the soil first before applying soil amendment? Are there ways to remove lead? I've heard sunflowers may be useful for uptake of lead.
So I can tell you all about this. So EPA has just changed the lead level for what you should look at, and it went, I'm not going to remember if it was from 400 to 200 parts per million. You can look and see. Removal has been a standard approach at Superfund sites, but if you look at large areas, it's not feasible. So with some of these levels, and California has lower levels than EPA, I believe still, you can't excavate a third of Los Angeles. It's not going to happen. So there's been a lot of work looking at how to make the lead less bioavailable or less able to do harm. And plants don't do it, don't get sucked into that. It's not effective at all. But compost, especially compost that has high iron in it and high phosphorus in it, can do really well at changing the form of lead to make it less bioavailable. The other thing to realize with lead is that the main concern is eating the soil directly. And that's concern is for little kids who are going to be more likely to eat soil and also absorb lead more efficiently, maybe because they need more calcium because their bones are growing. Anyway, if you start using compost over time and use high rates of compost initially, what you're going to do is you're going to get much better growth on the soil. So it's going to be much harder for kids to gain access to playing in the dirt. And you're also going to dilute the lead concentration, and you're also over time likely going to change the bioaccessible or bioavailable fraction of the lead in the soil. There's been some wonderful extension publications at a Kansas State University. Ganga Hederachi has done a lot of work that was funded by the Brownfields program. Ganga and I have done a couple of papers together on this issue, and we're working on another one right now. So excavation is great, but where are you going to get your clean material, where are you going to put your dirty stuff, and it's impractical on the scale you're talking about. Compost use is the best achievable, realistic solution.
Once again, Gary and Sally, your responses are right on target and very comprehensive and thorough. Where we seem to be in a graduate course on composting and marketing. Really appreciate it. Chris, do we have any more questions?
We don't. I was going to ask Sally one question though.
Sure.
What about putting compost in raised beds in places like that? What about, how do you feel about that?
So in fact, I talked about the Tacoma program a lot. Tacoma, there was an Asarco smelter there that resulted in extensive lead and arsenic contamination of the soils. And one of the things that's done with that community garden program is soils are tested for total lead and arsenic for free. If community gardens and growing food is what your focus is for using the soil, what they do is they take cardboard out of the recycling, put that down on the pathways, then take wood out of recycling, chip it, and use that as mulch over the cardboard, and that keeps weeds down and it reduces access to the soil. Also saves the city money. And then they garden in raised beds with the topsoil. And that's tested, regulated, and that's a great way to reduce any potential lead or arsenic exposure. In your backyard, you're less likely to do something like that. But again, make sure you have a plant cover, and you can also, depending on what you want to grow, either grow in a raised bed or grow stuff that only has the edible portion above ground, and make sure you wash it.
Gary?
All right, I'm going to defer to Sally. She has a lot more knowledge and background on me, and I think what she outlined is perfect.
Awesome. Well, it appears we have no more questions. Oh, wait a second. We have one more question, two more questions. Eileen asks, can you suggest how to deal with arsenic in old orchard soils?
Yeah, so arsenic isn't going to be useful. So one of the big issues with arsenic is movement to groundwater and how much of the groundwater is used for drinking water. Orchard soils, it's likely going to be a limited extent of contamination-ish. Depending on where your water source is and testing of the water, it's required to test in the US, I think, for arsenic. If you add a lot of phosphorus to the soil, the phosphorus will displace the arsenic and help move it down a profile because they're related chemically. And again, compost can help. But realize that initially, if you use high rates of phosphorus, you're going to make more of that arsenic soluble. So do that, wait a couple of years, and then grow. Otherwise, use compost.
Okay. Gary Liss asks, what is the source of biochars you referred to?
So I did studies with the different plant growth pictures of the pansies. That was walnut char, and they were different nut char biochars. USDA protocols for biochar. You have to look at the 336. I know it's a very heavy on farmer funding for use of biochar in addition to compost.
Gary?
Well, I think we're 2 minutes before time. We are indebted to Sally Brown from University of Washington, Gary Gittere from McGill Compost Industries. Terrific information, and thank you so much for participating in the responses from our questions, in addition to your great presentations. Thanks so much. We will be having another webinar probably in June of this year, and we will keep everybody posted. Thanks for tuning in, and again, thanks to Sally, Gary, Rick, and Chris. Thank you for your help, and we will see everybody soon. And you can start composting immediately.